I watched my backyard sink into the Tennessee River one rainy Tuesday morning in April, and that was when I knew something had gone catastrophically wrong. My name is Jackson Jennings, and I had lived on this property outside Chattanooga for 15 years. The house sat on a beautiful 2-acre lot with 100 feet of riverbank frontage. When I bought it, the bank was stable, covered in native grasses and trees that had held the soil in place for decades. My grandfather used to say that land near water was either your greatest blessing or your worst nightmare, depending on how you treated it. I was about to learn just how right he was. The problem started 6 months earlier, in October, when construction crews broke ground on the Riverside Estates development upstream from my property. The developer, a company called Premier Horizon Properties, had purchased 40 acres of farmland and planned to build 60 luxury homes, complete with an aggressive homeowners association that would maintain property values and enforce strict community standards. I had gone to the initial town hall meetings, mostly out of curiosity. The renderings looked impressive, and the developer promised minimal environmental impact. I should have paid more attention. The first sign of trouble came in December. I noticed that the river's edge seemed closer to my back porch than usual. Not dramatically so, but enough that I walked down with a tape measure and some stakes to mark the distance. 32 feet from my porch to the water's edge. I made a note in my phone and figured I was being paranoid. By February, it was 28 feet. I started documenting everything with photographs, always from the same position on my back deck. The erosion was subtle but undeniable. The mature willow tree that had stood 15 feet from the water was now leaning at a precarious angle, its roots exposed like gnarled fingers grasping at nothing. The grassy bank had developed a sharp drop-off where there used to be a gentle slope. That Tuesday in April, after 3 days of heavy rain, I woke to a sound like distant thunder. I ran outside in my bathrobe and watched in horror as a 10-foot section of my riverbank simply collapsed into the water, taking the willow tree with it. The raw edge left behind revealed layers of soil and clay, and lower down, something that made my stomach drop. Smooth, disturbed earth where there should have been undisturbed sediment layers. Someone had been digging on my property. I grabbed my phone and called the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department. Deputy Frank Morris arrived within an hour, a stocky man in his 50s with the weathered face of someone who had seen too much. He stood at the edge of my collapsed bank, hands on his hips, shaking his head. "Mr. Jennings, this looks like excavation to me," he said. "See how uniform that lower layer is. That is not natural erosion." "But who would dig out my riverbank?" I asked, though I already had a suspicion forming. "Let me make some calls," he said. While Deputy Morris worked his radio, I walked along what remained of my property line, following the river upstream. The erosion extended at least 200 feet, all along the boundary between my land and the construction site. When I reached the edge of the Riverside Estates property, I stopped cold. The construction site was massive. Concrete foundation forms dotted the landscape, and several houses were already framed. But what caught my attention was the equipment staging area near the river. Dump trucks, excavators, and a loaded conveyor system sat idle in the morning light, and everywhere, piled in neat berms around the foundation sites, was sand. River sand. The kind of sand that comes from riverbanks, not from commercial suppliers. "Son of a," I muttered. Deputy Morris came up behind me. "I just talked to the county planning office. Premier Horizon Properties pulled permits for 60 residential units, but nothing about excavation or sand removal." "They stole it," I said flatly. "They stole sand from my riverbank to use in their concrete foundations." That is a serious accusation, Morris said. But I have to admit, this does not look good for them. I am going to need to bring in some experts. We are talking about environmental crimes, property damage, possibly theft. This is bigger than a simple trespassing case. Over the next week, my property became a crime scene of sorts. The Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation sent inspectors. A geologist from the University of Tennessee came out and took soil samples. A surveyor confirmed that the excavation had occurred entirely on my property, extending down below the normal waterline. The geologist's report was damning. Someone had systematically removed approximately 2,000 cubic yards of sand and gravel from my riverbank over a period of several months, most likely at night or during periods when river noise would mask the sound of machinery. The estimated value of the stolen material was over $40,000, but the damage to my property was catastrophic. Without the sand and gravel base, the upper layers of soil had no support. The erosion would continue, potentially taking my entire backyard and threatening the foundation of my house. Stabilization would cost at least $200,000. I hired a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Romano, a sharp environmental attorney from Nashville who specialized in construction disputes. She reviewed the evidence with the kind of focused intensity that made me glad she was on my side. "This is one of the most blatant cases I have seen," she said during our first meeting. "They did not just steal from you. They destabilized your entire property and created an ongoing environmental hazard. The river is a navigable waterway, which means federal laws apply. We are talking about violations of the Clean Water Act, the Rivers and Harbors Act, and Tennessee environmental statutes, plus civil liability for damages, loss of property value, and emotional distress." "What about the HOA?" I asked. "They are starting to move people into the finished houses." Patricia's expression darkened. "That is where this gets interesting. The HOA does not technically exist yet. It is still under developer control. But once they transfer authority to a resident board, things get complicated. We need to move fast." She filed a lawsuit within 2 weeks, naming Premier Horizon Properties, their construction company, and the individual developer, a man named Richard Vance. We also sent notice to every buyer who had closed on a property in Riverside Estates, informing them that their homes might be built on stolen materials, and that the HOA they were joining might inherit significant legal liabilities. That was when I met Brenda. Brenda Kowalski was 47 years old, had blonde hair styled in the precise geometric cut that seemed to be uniform for women of her demographic, and had recently been elected president of the Riverside Estates HOA. The developer had transferred control earlier than planned, probably to distance himself from the brewing legal storm. Brenda called me on a Friday evening, and her voice had that special quality of barely suppressed fury that I would come to know well. "Mr. Jennings, this is Brenda Kowalski, president of the Riverside Estates Homeowners Association. I am calling about this ridiculous lawsuit you have filed." "Hello, Mrs. Kowalski. There is nothing ridiculous about it. Your developer stole 2,000 cubic yards of sand and gravel from my property." "That is allegedly," she snapped. "And even if it is true, which I am not conceding, it has nothing to do with the HOA. We are innocent homeowners who bought in good faith." "The HOA inherited the development's assets and liabilities when control transferred," I said, repeating what Patricia had told me. "That includes responsibility for environmental damage and theft." "We will fight this," Brenda said. "We have a lawyer too. And I want you to know that this kind of hostile action against your neighbors is exactly the sort of thing that tears communities apart. We were hoping to welcome you into our community association eventually. But clearly, you are not the kind of person who values good neighborly relations." I almost laughed. "Mrs. Kowalski, your development stole my land. My property is literally falling into the river, and you are talking about neighborly relations." "I am talking about perspective, Mr. Jennings. Even if there was some minor excavation, which again I am not conceding, the value of our development increases everyone's property values, including yours. You should be thanking us for improving the neighborhood." "My house is going to fall into the river," I shouted. "There is no need to be dramatic," she said coldly. "I am sure we can work something out. Perhaps the HOA could offer you a settlement, something reasonable like $5,000 for your trouble." $5,000. I could not believe what I was hearing. "The damage is over $200,000. That is what your lawyer claims. We have our own engineers who say the erosion is natural, caused by normal river processes, and exacerbated by your failure to maintain your property correctly. If anything, you should be paying us for creating an eyesore that affects our property values." I hung up on her. The next day, I received a certified letter from the Riverside Estates HOA attorney. It was a countersuit, claiming that my property's eroded condition constituted a public nuisance that threatened their development, and demanding that I either fix the problem immediately or sell my land to the HOA for fair market value, which they estimated at $60,000. My property had been worth at least $300,000 before the erosion started. Patricia was not surprised. "This is standard intimidation. They are hoping you will panic and settle cheaply. We are not going to do that." Over the summer, the legal battle intensified. The State Environmental Agency issued violations against Premier Horizon Properties and the construction company, with fines totaling $500,000. The federal EPA opened an investigation into Clean Water Act violations. The county suspended all building permits for Riverside Estates until the matter was resolved. The HOA residents were furious. Most of them had no idea what Richard Vance had done. They had bought their dream homes in good faith, and now they were trapped in a legal nightmare. Some directed their anger at Vance, but many, led by Brenda Kowalski, focused their rage on me. The harassment started small. I would find garbage on my driveway. Someone spray-painted "Sue Happy" on my mailbox. Cars would slow down when passing my house, and people would take pictures, pointing and talking. I installed security cameras and documented everything. Then Brenda got creative. In August, I received a notice that the county was investigating me for unauthorized construction and environmental damage. Someone had filed a complaint claiming I had illegally modified my riverbank and caused the erosion myself as part of a scheme to blame the development. It was absurd, but I still had to hire an engineer to provide testimony and documentation proving I had not excavated my own property. The complaint came from the Riverside Estates HOA. In September, I found a dead deer on my back porch. It had been shot recently, still warm. I called Deputy Morris, who came out and took photographs. He found tire tracks in the mud near my property line. "This is escalating," he said grimly. "These HOA folks are serious. Can you arrest them?" "For what? I cannot prove who did this. But I am going to increase patrols around your property." The breakthrough came in October, almost exactly 1 year after construction had started. A former employee of the construction company, a heavy equipment operator named Miguel Reyes, contacted Patricia. He had been fired for complaining about safety violations, and now he was ready to talk. We met at Patricia's office in Nashville. Miguel was a compact man in his 30s with nervous hands and a guilty conscience. "I operated the excavator," he said. "They had me working at night, starting around 11 and going until 4 or 5 in the morning. They told me it was legal, that they had permission from the property owner upstream to take sand from the riverbank." "Did you believe them?" Patricia asked. Miguel looked down. "I wanted to. The pay was good. But after a few weeks, I started to have doubts. The site supervisor, this guy named Tony, he was really paranoid about being seen. He made us work without lights when the moon was bright enough. And the location kept moving further upstream onto what looked like a different property." "Did you say anything?" I asked Tony about it. "He told me to mind my own business and do my job. Said the developer had everything worked out with the lawyers. But then one night I saw Mr. Vance on site. Richard Vance, the developer. He and Tony were arguing. I could not hear everything, but I heard Vance say something like, 'Just get the sand. We are already too deep to back out now.' That was when I knew something was wrong." "Why did you keep working?" I asked. Miguel met my eyes. "I have a family, man. 3 kids. I needed the job, but I am not going to lie for them in court. I am not going to prison because some rich developer wanted to save money on construction materials." Patricia leaned forward. "Will you testify?" "Yes, I will testify. I will tell them everything." Miguel's testimony changed everything. With a first-hand witness confirming the illegal excavation, the criminal case against Premier Horizon Properties and Richard Vance solidified. The district attorney charged Vance with theft, environmental crimes, and fraud. Tony, the site supervisor, was charged as an accomplice. The civil case moved forward too. Patricia filed for summary judgment, arguing that with criminal charges pending and witness testimony confirming the theft, there was no factual dispute to be decided by a jury. The judge agreed on the liability question, leaving only damages to be calculated, but the HOA was not done fighting. In November, Brenda showed up at my house. She drove a white Mercedes SUV and wore a designer tracksuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I watched from my window as she marched up my driveway, and I seriously considered not answering the door, but I was curious. I opened the door before she could knock. "Mrs. Kowalski, what can I do for you? We need to talk," she said. Neighbor to neighbor. I thought we were not neighbors. I thought I was a happy troublemaker ruining your community. She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Feelings have been running high, but the board has authorized me to make you an offer. A real offer, not the previous one." Against my better judgment, I let her in. We sat in my living room, and she looked around with the critical eye of someone evaluating everything for resale value. "Your house has good bones," she said. "Needs updating, but good bones. Mrs. Kowalski, what is your offer?" She pulled out a folder. "The HOA is prepared to pay for complete stabilization of your riverbank using the best available methods. We are talking about a proper retaining wall, erosion control, and restoration of your yard. Our engineers estimate $220,000. In exchange, you drop the lawsuit against the HOA and sign a non-disparagement agreement." I flipped through the proposal. It was detailed and professional. "What about Richard Vance and Premier Horizon? You can pursue them all you want. We do not care about Vance. He screwed us over as much as he screwed you. But the HOA is just homeowners. We did not steal anything. We should not have to pay for what that criminal did." There was logic in what she said. The HOA members really were victims of Vance's fraud, but I also knew that legally, the HOA had inherited the developer's liabilities. "I will discuss it with my attorney," I said. "There is more," Brenda said. "If you settle with us and drop the HOA from the suit, We will fully cooperate with the criminal case against Vance. We have documents, emails, financial records. Everything the prosecutors need to make sure he goes to prison for a long time. But if you keep the HOA in the lawsuit, we will fight. We will tie everything up in appeals and motions for years. You might win eventually, but it will take forever, and you will spend a fortune on legal fees. It was a threat disguised as an offer, but it was also a good deal. I will talk to my lawyer, I repeated. Patricia and I met the next day. She reviewed the HOA's proposal and nodded slowly. This is actually reasonable. You would get what you need, and we can focus all our energy on nailing Vance. The HOA has deeper pockets than Vance does, but they also have a better moral argument. A jury might be sympathetic to them. So you think I should take it? I think you should consider it seriously, but I want to add some conditions. First, the HOA admits no wrongdoing but acknowledges that the damage occurred. Second, they pay your legal fees to date, which is about $40,000. Third, the work on your property gets done before you sign anything. Fourth, they agree not to oppose your claims against Vance and Premier Horizon, and they provide all documents and testimony we request. Will they go for that? Let us find out. They did. It took 2 weeks of negotiation, but in the end, Brenda and the HOA board agreed to Patricia's terms. They were desperate to move on and start rebuilding their community's reputation. By December, construction crews were working on my riverbank, driving steel pilings deep into the bedrock and building a proper retaining wall that would hold for generations. They restored my yard, planted new trees, and even built a nice stone patio overlooking the river. I signed the settlement agreement on a cold morning in January, sitting in Patricia's office with Brenda and her attorney present. We did not shake hands. The criminal case against Richard Vance went to trial in March. I testified about discovering the erosion and the collapse of my riverbank. Miguel Reyes testified about the nighttime excavation operation. The HOA provided financial records showing that Vance had budgeted only $20,000 for sand and gravel, but had used at least $60,000 worth of material in the foundations, with no receipts showing where it came from. The most damning evidence came from the geologist and the environmental engineers. They had conducted a detailed analysis of the sand used in the Riverside Estates foundations and compared it to samples from my riverbank. The grain size, mineral composition, and sediment layers were an exact match. Some of the foundation sand even contained fragments of freshwater mussels that were native to that specific stretch of the Tennessee River. It was like DNA evidence, but for sand. Vance's attorney tried to argue that the similarity was coincidental, that river sand from anywhere in the region would look similar. But the expert witnesses tore that argument apart. The combination of characteristics was specific to a very limited area, essentially just the stretch of river that included my property and the immediate upstream section. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and came back with guilty verdicts on all counts: theft of property, environmental crimes, fraud, and conspiracy. The judge sentenced Vance to 4 years in prison and ordered him to pay restitution. Between my damages, the fines, and the cleanup costs, he owed over $2 million. He filed for bankruptcy immediately. Tony, the site supervisor, took a plea deal and received 2 years probation in exchange for his testimony. Miguel Reyes was granted immunity for cooperating with the investigation. Premier Horizon Properties collapsed. The company's assets were seized and liquidated to pay judgments and fines. The Riverside Estates development was left in limbo, half finished, with the HOA struggling to maintain property values and complete necessary infrastructure. I felt bad for the residents. Most of them were good people who had made an innocent purchase and ended up trapped in a nightmare. But that was not my fault, and I could not fix it for them. Brenda called me one more time about a month after Vance's sentencing. Her voice was different this time, tired and lacking its usual aggressive edge. "Mr. Jennings, I wanted to apologize," she said. "I was wrong about a lot of things. I blamed you when I should have been angry at Vance, and I let the stress of the situation turn me into someone I am not proud of." "Thank you for saying that," I said. "I know this has been hard on everyone. The HOA is stabilizing. We have a plan to finish the infrastructure and restore our reputation. It is going to take years, but we will get there. And for what it is worth, I am glad you fought back. If you had not, Vance would have gotten away with it, and who knows what other corners he cut on our houses." "Have you had them inspected, top to bottom?" "We found some issues, mostly minor, but we are fixing everything. We are going to make Riverside Estates into the community it should have been from the start." "Good luck with that." "You too, Mr. Jennings. And if you ever want to come to one of our summer cookouts, you would be welcome. I mean that." I never took her up on the offer, but I appreciated the gesture. Life slowly returned to normal. My new retaining wall held through the spring floods. The trees I had planted grew strong and healthy. My property was secure again, though it would never look exactly like it had before. The scars were still there if you knew where to look. I started going to county planning meetings again, paying attention to new development proposals. I joined a local environmental advocacy group that monitored riverbank construction projects. I gave interviews to local news stations about the importance of environmental regulations and the danger of cutting corners in construction. Richard Vance served 3 years of his 4-year sentence before being released on parole. I heard he moved to Florida and took a job as a sales manager for a pool supply company. His developer days were over, his professional licenses permanently revoked. The Riverside Estates, HOA, eventually stabilized. Property values recovered somewhat, though never quite reaching the projections from the original marketing materials. Brenda served 2 terms as president before stepping down. From what I heard, she did a good job, learning from the crisis and building a more transparent and accountable community organization. I saw her once more, about 3 years after everything ended. I was at the hardware store in downtown Chattanooga, and she was in the garden section examining plants. We made eye contact, and she gave a small wave. I waved back. No words were necessary. Sometimes I stand on my back patio in the evening and watch the river flow past. The retaining wall is solid and strong, holding back the water and protecting what is mine. But I never forget how close I came to losing everything, because someone decided that stealing from their neighbor was acceptable if it saved money and increased profits. The lesson I learned was simple: pay attention. Watch what happens around you. Question authority when something feels wrong. Demand accountability from developers, from HOAs, from anyone who has power over your community. Because if you do not stand up for yourself, nobody else will. And if someone steals your sand, make sure they pay for every single grain. The erosion had told the story, written in layers of disturbed soil and missing sediment. It had revealed a crime that was supposed to stay hidden, buried under concrete foundations and manufactured paperwork. But the earth does not lie. It keeps records that no amount of legal maneuvering can erase. I learned other things too. I learned that homeowners associations are only as good as the people who run them. Brenda started out as an antagonist, more concerned with protecting her investment than seeking truth or justice. But she grew during the crisis, eventually becoming someone who could admit mistakes and work toward real solutions. Not everyone has that capacity for growth. I also learned that the line between victim and accomplice can be thin. The HOA members bought into a development built partially on stolen materials. They did not know about the theft, but they benefited from it. Their beautiful homes had foundations mixed with my sand, their property values built on my loss. When they fought to protect themselves, they were also fighting to protect the fruits of a crime. I understood their position, even sympathized with it, but that did not make it right. The county eventually passed new regulations for riverbank construction. Developers now had to conduct detailed surveys before and after any work near waterways. They had to post bonds sufficient to cover potential environmental damage. And they faced mandatory criminal referrals if any irregularities were discovered. The rules were nicknamed Jennings standards by the local environmental community, though I tried not to let that go to my head. My lawyer, Patricia Romano, used the case to build her reputation as a fierce environmental advocate. She took on several similar cases across Tennessee and won most of them. We stayed in touch, meeting for coffee every few months to discuss ongoing environmental issues in the region. She became not just my attorney but a genuine friend. Deputy Frank Morris retired about 2 years after the case concluded. At his retirement party, he pulled me aside and told me that my case had been one of the most satisfying of his career. Most of the time, these white-collar criminals get away with it, he said. They hide behind corporate structures and expensive lawyers, but we got this one. We got him good. Miguel Reyes, the equipment operator who testified against Vance, moved his family to Kentucky and found work with a legitimate construction company. He sent me a Christmas card the first year, thanking me for not including him in the lawsuit and for understanding that he had been trapped in a bad situation. I wrote back, telling him that I respected his courage in coming forward. It takes strength to admit involvement in something wrong, even when you were just following orders. The environmental damage to the Tennessee River was harder to quantify. The state conducted studies and determined that the sand removal had disrupted aquatic habitats and affected water flow patterns for about half a mile downstream. The ecosystem would recover eventually, but it would take decades. That was perhaps the saddest part of the whole affair. Vance served 3 years in prison, paid some fines and restitution, and moved on with his life. But the river would bear the scars of his greed for generations. I thought about that often when I stood on my patio. The river looks peaceful and eternal, but it is also fragile. Every action we take near water has consequences that ripple far beyond our property lines. Stealing 2,000 cubic yards of sand was not just theft from me. It was theft from everyone who used and enjoyed the river, from the fish and mussels that lived in it, from future generations who deserve to inherit it intact. One afternoon in late summer, about 4 years after the collapse of my riverbank, I was working in my garden when I noticed someone walking along the river trail that ran through the public access area downstream from my property. It was a woman with 2 young kids, maybe 7 and 9 years old. They were skipping stones and laughing. The woman looked up and saw me watching. She waved. "Beautiful property," she called out. "Thank you," I called back. "We live in Riverside Estates," she continued, walking closer to my property line. "I am Jennifer. These are my kids, Max and Sophie." I walked down to meet them. "Jackson Jennings," her eyes widened. "Oh, you are the one who—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. "The one whose sand was stolen, yeah," I said with a smile. "That is me." "I am so sorry that happened," Jennifer said. "We bought our house about 2 years ago after everything settled down. We got a really good deal because of the development's reputation. But honestly, it is a great community. Everyone looks out for each other now. That is good to hear. Can I ask you something? Jennifer said hesitantly. Do you regret it? Fighting the HOA, I mean. A lot of people say you could have just settled quietly and avoided all the drama. I thought about that. No, I said finally. I do not regret it. If I had settled quietly, Vance would have gotten away with it. He probably would have done the same thing on his next development, stolen from someone else. And the county would not have passed the new environmental regulations. Sometimes you have to fight, even when it is hard, even when it makes you unpopular. Because if you do not, nothing changes. Jennifer nodded. My husband is on the HOA board now. He always says that what happened with you taught the whole community to be more careful, to ask more questions, to hold people accountable. So thank you for that. I watched her kids playing by the water, innocent and happy. This was why it mattered. This was why I had spent 2 years in legal battles and dealt with harassment and threats. So that communities would be built the right way, with integrity and respect for the environment. So that kids like Max and Sophie could grow up near rivers that were protected and cherished, not exploited and damaged. You are welcome, I said. They moved on, continuing their walk, and I returned to my garden. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across my restored yard. The new trees were taller now, their roots digging deep and holding the soil firm. In another 10 years, you would barely be able to tell that anything had gone wrong here. Nature had a way of healing itself, given time and proper care. I thought about Brenda too. Despite our rocky beginning, I had to give her credit. She could have continued fighting, could have made my life miserable for years. But she chose to face reality, accept responsibility, and work toward a solution. That took courage, especially for someone who had probably never faced serious adversity before. The HOA could have selected someone else as president during the crisis, someone who would just rubber stamp the board's decisions and avoid making waves. Instead, they had Brenda, who was stubborn and difficult but ultimately capable of growth. The legal settlement had given me financial compensation and repaired my property, but it could not give me back the year of stress and fear. It could not erase the memory of watching my land collapse into the river. It could not undo the nights I lay awake wondering if my house would be next, if I would lose everything I had worked for because of someone else's criminal greed. But it had given me something valuable too. It had shown me that the system could work, that justice was possible even against powerful opponents with expensive lawyers. It had connected me with people like Patricia Romano and Deputy Morris and Miguel Reyes, good people who were willing to stand up for what was right. It had taught me that ordinary citizens really could make a difference when they refused to be intimidated. I went inside and poured myself a glass of whiskey. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory. Land near water is either your greatest blessing or your worst nightmare. For a while there, it had been a nightmare, but I had fought my way through, and now it was a blessing again. The phone rang. It was Patricia. Jackson, I have news, she said. The bankruptcy trustee for Premier Horizon just approved an additional distribution. You are getting another $30,000 from the liquidation proceeds. I thought we had already gotten everything we were going to get from that. They found some hidden accounts. Vance had been moving money around trying to keep it from creditors, but the trustee tracked it down. It is not a lot, but it is something. Every bit helps, I said. How is the Murphy case going? That was another Riverbank theft case Patricia was handling, similar to mine but involving a development near Memphis. We are making progress. The developer is more sophisticated than Vance was, better at covering his tracks. But we have got him. It is just a matter of time. Good. Do not let him get away with it. Never, Patricia said firmly. You taught me that, you know. Before your case, I probably would have pushed for a quick settlement. But watching you fight, seeing how important it was to hold these people accountable, it changed my approach. I am a better lawyer because of you. That is kind of you to say. It is true. Anyway, I will send over the paperwork for the additional distribution. Talk soon. After we hung up, I returned to the patio. Night had fallen fully now, and the stars were emerging overhead. The river was a dark ribbon reflecting moonlight, flowing endlessly toward the Mississippi and ultimately the Gulf of Mexico. My little piece of riverbank was just one tiny spot on that vast journey, but it mattered. It mattered to me, and it mattered to the ecosystem, and it mattered as a principle. I realized then that I was not angry anymore. For a long time, rage had been my constant companion. Rage at Richard Vance for his theft and disregard. Rage at Brenda and the HOA for their initial attacks. Rage at a system that seemed designed to protect the powerful and exploit the vulnerable. But somewhere along the way, that anger had transformed into something else. Determination, maybe, or purpose. A commitment to making sure that what happened to me would be harder for developers to do to others. The County Planning Commission had invited me to serve as a volunteer advisor on environmental issues. I had accepted and attended my first meeting the previous week. It was dry stuff, reviewing permit applications and environmental impact studies. But it was important work, and I was good at it. My experience had given me insight that few others had. I could look at a development proposal and spot the warning signs, the corners being cut, the potential for environmental damage. I had also started mentoring other property owners who were facing similar issues. A man in Knoxville reached out after his hillside started sliding due to improper grading on an adjacent development. A woman in Nashville discovered that a new shopping center had diverted a creek through her property without permission. I helped them find lawyers, connected them with environmental experts, and shared what I had learned about fighting back against powerful developers. It was not the life I had imagined when I bought this property 15 years ago. I had planned to live quietly, work my job as a mechanical engineer, fish in the river, and grow old in peace. Instead, I had become an accidental activist, thrust into public life by circumstance and necessity. But I did not regret it. Grandfather was right about land near water being a blessing or a nightmare. What he did not mention was that sometimes it could be both at the same time, and that the difference often depended on your willingness to fight for it. I finished my whiskey and went inside. Tomorrow, I had a planning commission meeting to prepare for. Someone had proposed a new marina development that involved dredging operations near a protected wetland. The application looked questionable, and I wanted to review the environmental impact statement carefully before the public hearing. The work never really ended. There was always another developer trying to cut corners, always another scheme to exploit natural resources for private profit. But there were also always people willing to stand up and say no, to demand accountability, to insist that we could build and grow and prosper without destroying the places we loved. I was one of those people now. It was not a role I had chosen, but it was one I had grown into. And as I prepared for bed, looking out my window at the moonlit river and the solid retaining wall that protected my property, I felt something close to contentment. The erosion had told the story. The sand had been stolen, the crime revealed, and justice eventually served. My riverbank would never be exactly what it was, but it was stable now, protected, able to heal. And that was enough. Enough for tonight, anyway. Tomorrow there would be new battles to fight, new injustices to challenge, new stories to uncover. But tonight I could rest, knowing that I had done what needed to be done. I had stood up for myself and my property. I had refused to be bullied or intimidated. I had forced the truth into the light and made powerful people face the consequences of their actions. The river flowed on outside my window, eternal and patient, carrying away the sediment of the past and carving new channels toward the future. And I flowed with it, changed by what had happened but not broken, ready for whatever came next. That was the real story, I realized. Not just about stolen sand or erosion or even justice. It was about resilience, about ordinary people finding extraordinary strength when circumstances demanded it, about communities learning from their mistakes and becoming better, about the slow, patient work of holding the line against those who would take what was not theirs. I slept well that night, better than I had in years. And when I woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through my windows and the sound of the river flowing past my property, I was ready to face the day. Ready to keep fighting, keep working, keep standing up for what mattered, because the erosion had told the story, yes. But I was the one who had made sure people listened.